Hello and welcome to my video where I'm going to show you how to knit this scalloped bind off in stockinette stitch. This wavy edge is basically created by ruching or bunching up the stockinette stitch, and this process curls the edge towards the front, so you get a nice contrast between the right side and the wrong side of the knitting. Because this is a bind off pattern, you will of course be adding this to the end of your knitting project. Just make sure that you end with a multiple of 6 stitches plus 5 on your needle. I've personally got 17 stitches on my needles, and I've already done a couple of rows of stockinette stitch to represent my knitting project. Make sure that you finish your knitting project on a wrong side row. Because I'm doing stockinette stitch, I've finished with a purl row. Okay, so for row 1 you need to begin by slipping a stitch knitwise. To do this, you simply take your right hand needle up through the first stitch as if to knit, but instead of knitting it, you just slip it off the end of the needle. And then you just do knit stitches for the rest of the row. For row 2, you begin by slipping a stitch purlwise. To do this, take your right hand needle down through the first stitch as if to purl, but instead of purling it, you just slip it off the end of your needle. Make sure you do this with the working yarn at the front of the needles towards you. Then purl 4 stitches. You then need to repeat knit 1, purl 5 until the end of this row. So first, take the working yarn between the needles to the back and knit a stitch. Then bring the working yarn between the needles to the front again and purl 5 stitches. And you just repeat this until the end of the row. So that's knit 1 and purl 5. Then rows 3 and 5 are the same as row 1, and row 4 is the same as row 2. So rather than demonstrate those again, I'm just going to put the pattern for these up on screen now. And then for row 6, you begin by slipping a stitch purlwise, and then you just purl the rest of the row. Your knitting should now look something like this. As you can see, I've got a couple of vertical lines, each consisting of 2 purl bumps. Purl bumps are just little bumps of yarn made by purl stitches that stand out from the surface. We'll be picking up these purl bumps in the next row, and it's this that will create the scalloped effect. Right, so for row 7, which is the last row, you need to start by slipping a stitch knitwise. You then need to repeat knit 1, bind off 4 times. So knit a stitch, then use your left hand needle to pick up the lower stitch on the right hand needle, take it over the stitch above and drop it off the end of the needle. And that's 1 bind off. You now need to repeat that 3 more times. So that's knit 1, bind off, knit 1, bind off, knit 1 and bind off. You should now have reached that first vertical line of purl bumps that are on the front of your knitting. As you can see, I have 2 purl bumps here, one above the other. You're now going to use your right hand needle to pick up these purl bumps from bottom to top. So take your right hand needle up and under that lower purl bump and up and under the upper purl bump. And then do a regular knit stitch. So now you should have 2 extra strands of yarn on your right hand needle. So take your left hand needle and pick up the upper strand, take it over the knit stitch and off the end of the needle. Then do the same for the other strand as well. And then you bind off 1 more to leave you with just 1 stitch on the right hand needle. You then need to knit a stitch, then bind off 1 5 times. So knit 1, bind off, knit 1, bind off, knit 1, bind off, knit 1, bind off, knit 1 and bind off. And then you just repeat from where you picked up the 2 purl bumps over and over until the end of the row. So you use your right hand needle to pick up the purl bumps from bottom to top, knit a stitch, pass the upper strand of yarn over the knit stitch, and repeat for the second strand, and bind off 1. And then you need to knit 1, bind off 1 5 times. This will leave you with just 1 stitch left. So you would cut the working yarn to leave you with at least 6 inches, take the yarn tail through the last stitch and tighten. You would then just need to weave this yarn tail into the back of your knitting. And that's it, that's how you make this scalloped bind off. And just as a quick side note, if you want a more dramatic scallop shape, you can always add a couple of plain rows between rows 6 and 7. So for row 7, you would slip a stitch knitwise and then knit the rest of the stitches. For row 8, you would slip a stitch purlwise and then purl the rest of the stitches. And then row 9 will be where you pick up those purl bumps. So basically there would just be more rows between the purl bumps and the bound off edge. And that's it, that's all there is to it. I really hope you enjoyed this video and thank you very much for watching.